In the last part, I created a class for storing data and put some methods on the class. What I'm going to do in this part is talk a little bit about the core operations of the Python object system. And to start that out, so let's say I have this holding class and you use it to make an instance. Okay, so we have a holding object. It turns out that the whole Python object system basically boils down to 3 operations. Okay, so you use the name of the class to make an instance like that. Once you have one, here are the 3 things that you can do. You can look up an attribute. This is the get operation. You can also set an attribute, like you can change a value, and then you can delete an attribute. It turns out that that's it. Those are the only 3 operations that the entire Python object system understands are those 3 things. Now, a few interesting aspects to this. One thing about it is that Python does not really enforce any rules, at least not normally. So like when you set an attribute, you can actually set attributes that don't even exist yet. Like right now, there's no attribute time, for instance. But if I wanted to make one just right here on the spot, 10:30 a.m., Python is fine with that. It's like, okay, make an attribute. So you can set new attribute. That actually leads to some very interesting problems, by the way. For instance, if you make a spelling mistake, like if I said h.share is equal to 87, now all of a sudden the object has shares and it has share on there. Again, there's only 3 things that you can do. It's like you can get an attribute, set an attribute, delete an attribute. Does have some interesting consequences for things like spelling errors. Another thing that kind of ties into this just concerns the way that methods work. Turns out that when you call a method, like you say h.cost, for instance, or you say h.sell25, those operations are actually also layered on top of this get, set, delete machinery. It turns out that when you say h.cost, that is actually 2 completely separate things going on. There's the lookup of the cost, and then there's the function call. That's a whole separate operation. Turns out that you can actually do one without the other. Like if I were to say c is equal to h.cost, like that, what happens is you get the method kind of comes back. It says, hey, here's the cost method of this holding object. If you were to put the parentheses on it, it would then fire afterward. You do the same thing for the cell. Like if I said s is equal to h.cell, comes back saying, well, there's the cell method. Just to see that, there's the shares. If I were to say s and then add in like a number there, you would see it alter the number of shares. So methods are actually kind of layered on top of this get, set, delete machinery. One reason to why you might care about this, by the way, is it actually can lead to some very crazy error messages. Here's one potential problem. Maybe you have all these attributes like name, shares, price. Cost is a little bit special in that you have to put the parentheses on it. I absolutely guarantee that somebody is going to forget to put the parentheses on it. And where they might forget to do it is in maybe something like string formatting. Like maybe somebody is printing out some data where they're formatting strings saying, yeah, okay, print out the shares and the name and the cost. And then what happens is they get a crazy error message. Actually, I used the wrong variable name. So we're going to replace one error message with another error message here. One thing that they might do is do this. They would say, okay, print out some values. And then they would get this cryptic error message saying a float is required. And then you're going to spend a lot of time staring at this, wondering, I wonder what's wrong with that. It might not be obvious that you're missing parentheses on the cost. Okay, so it can lead to some subtle behavior there, but the idea that methods are sort of layered on this get-set machinery is sort of interesting. Now, another thing that ties into this, okay, let's go back to getting attributes here. Turns out that there is another way to pull off attributes or access attributes. There's a set of functions called getAttr, setAttr, and deleteAttr. Essentially what you can do is you can say getAttr h, name, and this is the same as doing h.name. Or I can say setAttr h shares 50, for instance, and this is the same as saying h.shares is equal to 50. So it turns out that there are these functions that can be used to access attributes. Those are definitely worth knowing about because you can use them to write extremely general purpose code. Here's an example of that. I could make a list saying, here are some output columns, name, shares, and price. And then what I could do is I could write code that says, for like column name and output columns, print column name equals getAttr h column name. that is actually really cool. I mean, what happens is, you have a list of like the output that you want becomes something that you can change. You could reconfigure it in different ways. In fact, what I'm going to do is a little demo of that. I'm going to make a file called table.py, and I'm going to write an extremely general purpose function in here. I'm going to make something called print table, where you give me a list of objects and then a list of column names. And then what I'm going to do is make a nicely formatted table, maybe showing attributes from a list of objects. And here's how I'm going to do that. Maybe I'll print like a nice little header here. I'll say for column name in column names, print, I don't know, we'll format it in a 10 wide column here. Okay, so we'll print some headers. And then what I'm going to do is I'll just say for ob in objects, and then we'll write like another loop. We'll say for column name in column names. Again, we'll do like a little string formatting thing here. And I'm going to use that getAttr function. I'll say, why don't we just pull off some column name off of some object. I'm actually going to convert it to a string here. So let's convert it to a string. The end thing there just makes it not print a new line. So what I'm doing is I've written a function where you give me some objects. I'm using things like the getAttr function to pull off attributes. And it turns out that this is actually something very general purpose that will work with a lot of different things. For example, let's read a stock portfolio in here. Okay, there's a portfolio. I can import that print table code that I just wrote, and I could say things like print table portfolio, and then I pick what I want. I could say, well, I want the name and the shares. Okay, screwed it up. Column names here. That's easy enough to fix here. I'm going to do something that is normally not advised, but I'm going to reload the table module here. So let's try it again there. So what we've got is we can do print table, and I can pick the output column. That's actually really, really powerful, actually. Like I can pick the columns that I want. I can pick the order of the columns. Like if I want the shares to come first, I can do that. This is kind of illustrating sort of the core functions, I guess, on Python objects. I mean, you make an object. There are really only three things that you can do. I mean, you can get, set, and delete attributes. There are a couple of different ways of accessing that. I mean, you can either use the dot, or you can use things like the getAttr function. If you use things like getAttr, it actually opens up a possibility of writing extremely generic code. This print table thing that I've written, this is the kind of thing you might find in a library or a framework or something. It's like some very generic piece of code that just manipulates objects, doesn't really care what the objects are, but does it in a very generic way.